Hi, this is Mike from DraftBuddy.com, and I'm back with another video about the cheat sheet compiler in DraftBuddy for fantasy baseball. And this time I'm going to talk about DraftBuddy specifically and how it applies to an auction draft. Now, I had an auction league draft just last night, so I thought we'd do kind of a lessons learned and some tips for using DraftBuddy for an auction draft. The first thing I want to say, we'll talk about more fantasy related stuff right now, but auctions. The cheat sheets you really want to use as a guide. The thing about auctions is when you get into the auction, you don't know how aggressive or how conservative the other owners are going to be in terms of bidding. We had my cheat sheets here. This is in DraftBuddy, so I've copied stuff over. I had a few guys highlighted that I want to pay particular attention to or avoid. But let's look at the dollar values here. So on these cheat sheets, which is what I started out with before the auction started, was we had Pujols at 50, Miguel Cabrera at 49. Those were the top two players, I believe. Ryan Braun down here at 48, Kemp at 47, and that's on the hitter side. The pitcher side, if I go over to the full cheat sheet, Halladay and Kershaw were number one at 40 each. This was maybe a more shallow league than typical. It was 14 team, but only 20 roster spots because we reduced the number of starters. The dollar value should reflect that from the compiler. It was kind of predicting that 50 would be the top you'd pay for a player. Well, what is not uncommon is that we've got into the draft here. You can see Pujols was the first guy nominated. He went for 47, which is pretty close to the 50. Hanley Ramirez went for 43. That was a bit of a premium over the forecast. Ryan Braun went pretty close. Justin Verlander went next. He went pretty close, a little bit over. Brett Lowry went quite a bit higher, probably unjustified. Kershaw was close. But then we'll see as we go through here a little bit further, then the dollar values start to go up. So I guess the thing with auctions is it's not necessarily a bad thing to get in there early, especially if you're in a new auction with guys who haven't done it very much before. They may be a little bit hesitant at the start to spend the big dollars and have a big chunk of their cap gone right away, but then pretty soon after everyone gets into it and they want to see those dollars spent and everyone gets excited and they're like, well, I want to get good players, I got to spend the dollars. So if I go down a little bit further here, you can see Cabrera went actually for 62. Roy Halladay went for 51. Some of the pitchers went pretty high. So Bautista went for 54. Tulowitzki went for 58. So this was quite a bit more than the forecast. You should use your cheat sheets as a guide. So once you get into the thing, you can see, okay, these guys are going for a little bit higher than I predicted on my cheat sheets. What that means is everyone's going to have less dollars later, but if I want good players and I don't want an average team, I'm still going to have to spend a little bit. So don't be afraid to spend a little bit more than maybe you planned at the beginning. If you see a player you really want, don't be afraid to drop an extra dollar on them. You're just going to have players later who are maybe cheaper than you expected. There'll be some bargains out there, and everyone will be in the same boat. So you don't want to, you don't want to go too crazy, spending every dollar and then being stuck there watching the action for 2 hours because you can't bid on anybody else. So try to find a nice balance. But if all the top players are going for more than you expected, get in there and get at least a couple of those top players that you really hold in high regard. Try to find some value if you can, but what I want to just make sure is you don't get shut out. All right. Also, watch your roster spots because the roster spots tend to be valuable too. Here's my team over here on ESPN. As I said, 14 team league, 20 roster spots, 5 bench spots, and one thing where I got caught here, you can see I've got Bryce Harper here as one of my bench spots. I wish I hadn't done that because, realistically, I have a pretty short bench. Harper was sent down to the minors, and I already have other outfielders on the bench. So I already had Drew Stubbs purchased. But when I saw Bryce Harper's name, I got excited, put down a bid on him. Upon reflection, I'm like, those bench roster spots are valuable. I really would have been better off with a bench third baseman or middle infielder or another pitcher. Whereas I don't really need 3 outfielders on my bench, and that's a result of not being careful with the roster spots. So that's just something else to watch for in the auctions. Now let's get into something Draft Buddy specific when we're doing auctions. But if I scroll down here, all in all, it wasn't too bad to keep up with. We had 14 people doing the auction, no computer-controlled picks, and as long as I had, what was especially nice is I had 2 screens. So if you have that option, definitely go with that. I was doing this online on ESPN. The way things go here is you go to the cheat sheet, click on a player who's nominated, Delmon Young. Let's say he's nominated next. Just click the nominate button, takes me over here, and then I had to pick the team that won Delmon Young, and then put in the dollar value right over here, and then we're on to the next player. So really a pretty straightforward setup for doing the auction. However, you can see I did not complete the last 30 picks or so, and the reason for that is because we got to the point where almost everyone was out of money. Almost every player went for $1 from here right to the end, and I only had about 4 or 5 roster spots to fill, and everyone was in about the same boat. Some people had like 1 or 2 guys to fill, some had maybe as much as 6 or 7, but pretty much every player was going for right around $1. And I knew what positions I wanted to fill to complete out my roster based on what I had already drafted. So, at that point, I'm not as worried about keeping track of every single player in Draft Buddy. What I've got is some players that I want to target to fill up my roster. I'm like, okay, I know I want another infielder on my bench. I need 2 more pitchers, for example. I put them in my draft queue on ESPN, and then basically wait for them to come up. And if they come up, then I know I need to add more guys to my queue. But if you do find, my point being that with Draft Buddy, if you get to near the end of the auction, then don't worry about tracking every single player if it's getting to be too much, because if at $1 they do tend to go pretty quick. Just identify your players that you really want to target, especially for your team. Put them in your queue online, and then make sure you get bids in on those guys. You can fill out the rest of Draft Buddy the next day if you want to, or at this point, everything is online in your league manager. So the next thing I want to mention is one thing I did during the auction is this is a Roto League, so you may be looking for, depending on who you've drafted already, you may be looking for specific stats. Whether you're light on home runs, light on stolen bases, light on saves, or ERA is too high, you may want to look for the available players to see who might be the better grab between a couple guys. So I'm not sure if you recognize this or not in Draft Buddy, but if you go to the hitters and pitchers tabs, which are the cheat sheets, of course we have the cheat sheets where the players fall off, the complete cheat sheet that came from the compiler. If you scroll a little further to the right, you're going to see all the players and their projected stats. And the reason this is here is because it helps fill in the Roto tab with the standings. This also tracks what players have been taken or not, and there's some hidden columns that do this. So here's what I'm going to do. First thing you might want to do is you might want to just get rid of the columns that you don't need. By getting rid of, I do not mean delete them, I mean to hide them. So if I just highlight these, for example, and do a format, column, hide, and I've got rid of those hits, doubles, triples that I don't really need to see. Total bases, walks, strikeouts, let's get rid of those. If I hold down Control, I can actually highlight more than once, more than one column at a time. And there I go. I'm going to highlight all of those. Format, column, hide. Alright, so that's a little bit easier to look at, and this is a 5x5 Roto League, so now I've got my 5 categories plus the at-bats that I can look at a lot easier than all the stats being there. Now, I did say there, this is where players are tracked as well, whether they're drafted or not. It's in some hidden columns between the position and at-bat. So I highlight those 2 cells, format, column, unhide, Okay, and you see these numbers here? These numbers here refer to specific teams in the league, who drafted what player. Okay, so what I'm going to do to show players that aren't drafted, and we're going to go down the list here a fair bit, if it shows an error, that indicates a player that wasn't drafted yet. Alright, so how are we going to show just those players in an easy to see format? Highlight the headings right here, okay, and choose Data, Filter, Auto Filter. And I believe in the newer versions of Excel it's just Data Filter. Okay, so you see these arrows popped up here, and all I need to do is click on the one for this column, and click the NA or error. Okay, these are the undrafted players. So now I can quickly see the players that are undrafted, and I can look at their specific stats and see who's going to be good in home runs, who's going to be good in stolen bases, who are still available. And I can scroll down the list pretty easily. Shows their positions too. You could even, in fact, filter by position if you're so inclined, and see who's available and compare the guys based on that. And then to remove the filter, just click it again, hit all, click it again, hit all, or the other option would be to just go Data, Filter, and take off the filter. Alright, and then that shows them all. Now the one downside of this whole thing is when you have it on and you have a filter selected, then it also hides the rows off to the left. Of course, everything's lined up together, right? Now look at my cheat sheets. Okay, they're just, all I can see are two lines in the whole cheat sheet, because those are the rows that line up with the stuff I'm not filtering. So if you want to go back to the cheat sheets, you really do need to remove the filter, put it back to all, and then you can scroll back and see that. And I kind of like that. I kind of like that that feature where I can see the stats for the players. I think in future versions of the Draft Buddy, I'm going to have to split these things up and maybe have a detailed hitters cheat sheet with the stats, and a summary cheat sheet with just the player names, which we're used to using over here. Okay, that was all I wanted to show on this. So there are some items from an auction draft using Draft Buddy.